Well, thank you for being here to listen to me. How to begin? Are you troubled? Are you really troubled, as often I am, when you read about men or women who decide to support the Islamic State, apparently quite willingly and by their own choices? Are you troubled with that? By this question, I refer to their support for the Islamic State to the point of actually killing other people, usually strangers, and also perhaps killing themselves as well. This done in pursuit of objectives that they simply must seem meaningful and important to the people who do that. What could be their motivations? I confess that I have more questions than answers. We must try to understand what motivates people. From another recent book entitled, a great title, it's called Evil: Inside Human Violence and Cruelty. I've got that on the list as well if you want a reference to it. Ask the question, what is pure evil? We do not these days use the word evil very often. Evil involves the intentional infliction of harm, pain, or suffering on other people. However, most people who commit that evil do not consider themselves to be evil doers. Have you ever thought about that? In my lifetime, the epitome of evil would be Adolf Hitler. Hitler did not regard himself as an evildoer. In his own mind, he thought he was pursuing a higher calling. So we know that the victims of evil, the victims of violence, are usually innocent people who have done no wrong. We also know that our perception of evil often define evil as the other, the enemy, the outsider, the outgroup relative to ourselves. Evil has been with mankind, humankind, since the beginning of time. And evil represents the antithesis of order, peace, and stability. Evil figures have difficulty maintaining their control over their feelings, especially the feelings of rage and anger. So, let's ask ourselves or ponder the question, why would people perfectly, probably, at one point, innocent people, choose to join a movement which accepts violence and the infliction of death, pain, and suffering on other people? We know a lot about this, actually, because we have accumulated a lot of evidence. In last August, a young woman named Khadija Sultana, who lived in the United Kingdom with two friends, left the United Kingdom. They were all 15 years old, and they left to join ISIS. They were killed in Syria by a Russian airstrike. Kadisa, through her postings that we have now read, had already realized that she had made a mistake, and she tried to return home to the United Kingdom. But she did not make it home. She was 17 when she was killed. How can we understand a decision to leave your home in Britain and go to Syria to join ISIS, to kill others, and possibly to kill yourself as a suicide bomber? This compels us to stop and listen and think. I think it is important for us to try to understand what happens with such folks. So, here's some evidence. The Center for National Security at Fordham University, Fordham Law School in New York City, recently released a report on the 59 persons who have been captured in the United States and prosecuted for their affiliation with ISIS. And we can learn a lot. So from this Fordham study, as far as I can tell, the best and most objective appraisal we have so far, we have 59 cases. Let's see if we can generalize. The first is daunting to me, since I'm a guy. They're mostly males. Mostly men do this, relatively infrequently women. So, is this a hormonal issue? Is it the role of testosterone among males? So, males are a bigger problem than women. They're mostly young. There are lots of reasons why old folks don't do the evil that young folks do, mostly because we get tired and infirm and we run out of energy, but mostly they're young. Okay, here's the big one. Here's the big one. They were not integrated into a supportive community. They were isolated from others in the places where they lived. They told their interviewers that they were seeking meaning and purpose in their lives. Meaning and purpose. Many of them were recent converts. Recent converts involve another psychological problem called cognitive dissonance, having made a decision that involves a big change in your life. The normal cognitive capacity is to seek evidence that confirms the choice that you have made. And that means that people who are recent converts are more likely to be zealous. I'll come back to those figures before I'm done. If we have time, I'll watch the clock to make sure I don't talk too long. Anyway, what do we know worldwide about the problem of violent conflict between civilizations, or apparently sometimes what seems to be between religions? We know that worldwide many communities of people have broken down. Some of you have heard me talk before about the work of Robert Putnam at Harvard University, who wrote a book in 2000 called Bowling Alone, about the decline of communities in America. So social scientists like me worry about concepts like the following: atomization, isolation, okay? The idea that we are, dare I say it, all alone. We're all alone. We don't have anyone who cares or is concerned about us or thinks about us or values us. So we are cut off from others and we seek to find our way. There's lots of evidence in America about the decline both of nuclear families and of extended families in our civilization at this time. So, here's another problem. Because of our effort to find meaning and purpose, we come too often to live in what are called epistemic communities. We find a community of fellow believers who confirm our feelings and our ideas and our values. Now, what epistemic communities do is to exclude other people who are not like them. If communities of believers are cut off from all other folks, the basic realities of each community may be different. It is fair to suggest in our world that there may be, listen to this, I've written this, but it's hard to imagine. There may be no objective reality at all. Stop and think. No objective reality. That means there are a variety of subjective realities, and we can live in silos that exclude us from others. We live, therefore, in epistemic circles of reality. So let's try to put this human problem in perspective. This is not, by its very nature, a problem of Islam. It is not a problem of Muslims. But it may be a problem of the epistemic communities that want to define reality according to an exclusionary religious view. Let me give you a few examples. Years ago, when I was running a program for TCU in London, we suffered a bombing of a pub quite near the hotel where I lived. And the question was, who did the bombing? Was it the Irish Republican Army? What was going on? And do you remember the conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics in Northern Ireland? And do you remember a guy named Reverend Ian Paisley? Ever heard that name? Terrible guy. Okay. Reverend Paisley legitimated the use of violence in a place which is shorthand called Derry, but refers to the town of Londonderry in Northern Ireland. And he founded the Free Presbyterian Church of Londonderry to fight against Catholics. Or, you may remember the conflict between the Hutus, it's hard for me to say this, Hutus and the Tutsis. Does that roll off the tip of your tongue? The Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda. Okay. At the conclusion of the 20th century, merging into the 21st century. Okay? They fought and killed each other. And Samantha Power, who is now at the United Nations for the United States, wrote a book about our failure, the United States failure, the United Nations failure to do anything about that, called A Problem from Hell. Human beings too often divide themselves into us One more example. I'm trying to be multi-religious and multi-ethnic as I use examples. Okay. Do you remember the story of Dr. Baruch Goldstein, who in 1994 killed over 30 Muslims who were praying at the tomb of the patriarch in Hebron in the West Bank of Palestine? Baruch Goldstein was a physician who grew up in Brooklyn and was educated at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. Yet his personal commitment to an extreme form of Zionism brought him to a settlement in Israel where he assassinated 30 people who were praying. If Baruch had any deep or pervasive psychological issues that made him such a terrorist, we know nothing of them. Instead, he appears to have been an otherwise decent man who was overwhelmed by his sense of personal dedication to a Zionist version of reality. At this point, I talk about surrendering to gloom and doom because I personally try to avoid abject despair and depression over the human condition. I try to search for a more solid foundation for our hope for the future, but this is not easy. To our credit, mostly to our credit, Unitarians have tried to transcend us versus them differences, but too often we ourselves have failed. Remember the reading from the True Believer? That was a description of a man who worked for the Unitarian Service Committee in Europe during World War II, who was himself a Stalinist spy for the Soviet Union. I'll give you reference to that book if you like. So, let's review again. The people from the West who have mostly gone to join ISIS are predominantly male, about 87%, mostly young. If they're from the United States, they were American citizens, contrary to one of our politicians. They were not immigrants. They were earth-born American citizens. Okay. About 1/3 of them were recent converts. Most of them expressed some form of social alienation. They expressed forms of loneliness. They expressed forms of identity issues. Both of our political parties should be concerned with this reality. Have you heard any serious discussion in any presidential debate about things like this? That's when I feel real feelings of despair. Okay. Those who conducted lethal attacks within the United States, as in San Bernardino or in Orlando, the list goes on. Okay. Here's a big concern that troubles me that I try to work on as a lawyer/political scientist. About 90% of the ISIS-related cases involve some form of internet recruitment. Okay. I asked my class, my Civil Rights and Liberties class, a couple of weeks ago, I said, do any of you know about these sites? And I found, I think I had out of 30 students, I had 7 that told me that they knew how to get on what is called the dark net. Nobody needs to raise your hand. I have no idea how to get on the dark net. And I don't want anyone here who can do that to raise their hand. within our legal system for us effectively to deal with those kinds of recruitment problems. So, 60% of all of the cases involving terrorism in the United States involved communication between ISIS associates abroad and people who were being recruited in the United States. Now, these are not just semantic issues. Whether or not we use the word terrorist or, you ready for this? Quote, freedom fighter, unquote. All depends upon your point of view, right? Depends on whether we think our acts are justified. So, I'm about to close, and I want to quote from a poet named Wole Soyinka of Nigeria, who got the Nobel Prize for his writing. He said, "Many assaults on human dignity are the results of the visitation of fear. Such assaults of fear are a mere prelude for the domination of our minds and to the triumph of evil power over us." Thus wrote Soyinka. We can do better. We must do better. And if I have left you by this presentation with feelings of gloom and doom, let's try to transcend that as we close with music. So please rise. As you are willing and able, and join in singing hymn number 410, Surprised by Joy. Do you know those words? The word surprised by joy comes from a book by C.S. Lewis trying to explain his own understanding of contemporary Christianity, and I think you'll find this hymn uplifting.